Minutes past. I might as well just start with some introductions. Let me stop sharing this. All right, guys, first of all, thank you so much for coming here today from all over the world. What a privilege to have all of you join us, as well as our speakers. Before we talk about the event, I just want to give a brief intro to us. We're the Oxford Society of Aging and Longevity. We're the University Center for Education, Advocacy, and Research on behalf of the students. When it comes to longevity, we've got members from the Oxford University ecosystem and belong. So if you're interested in longevity, you're interested to learn more, we host regular talks and panels with some of the leading scientists, thinkers in this space. It'd be a pleasure to have you join our mailing list and come to our future talks. And if you ever come to Oxford, if you're not in Oxford already, please get in touch. We love meeting everyone interested in longevity. So yeah, without further ado, I'd like to dive right into this talk. So everyone who's here has probably seen the unbelievable kind of media fascination with Bryan Johnson and Project Blueprint that has emerged in the past couple of weeks. And really, I think even people within the longevity industry have been blown away. I know working in longevity, I'm constantly getting kind of blank stares from people when I try to explain what I do and what longevity is and what this field is. And one of the most remarkable things since Bryan sort of came out with Project Blueprint is the outpouring of messages I've been getting from completely random people and that have been introduced to the space and the idea of what age reversal is or could be as a result of all of this. So this really feels like a turning point, a time and a place in longevity science where it's starting to reach the mainstream and starting to gain more of an understanding of what this is as not just science fiction and not just snake oil. And we've got three people here today that have really been at the forefront of not just Bryan's effort, but of this entire movement. So I'm going to briefly introduce, obviously Bryan, CEO of Project Blueprint, has been involved in tech and frontier healthcare for a very long time. Project Blueprint is probably just his latest iteration, but hopefully he can tell us a little bit about his journey before and how we got here. Oliver Zolman, which is the doctor and the clinician who is the curator of curators for Bryan's various sort of protocols. And he's really been the mastermind behind creating a methodical approach, which not many people often get. Clinicians don't really get the opportunity to work with people like Bryan very often. And we'll really look forward to learning more about what that process was like. And of course, Ryan Smith, who's the VP of Tru-Diagnostics. They are an epigenetics bio-age testing firm. For those of you who don't know what that means, I hope Ryan will sort of talk about what is biological age testing, what's the significance of it, as well as talk about this whole idea of the Rejuvenation Olympics, which bring these three guys together. This public leaderboard of age rejuvenation and getting the whole world on board for this new social phenomenon. So really quickly, before we hand over to Bryan to talk a little bit about his experience, I just want to thank everyone from the Oxford Society of Aging and Longevity, everyone on the team who's been really super incredible. I want to thank Avi Roy, who helped connect us to Bryan Johnson and his team. I want to thank NetMind Life, our incredible sponsors and partners who are making healthy aging accessible through various platforms. And of course, thank you all for coming. So without further ado, Bryan, thank you so much for coming tonight or this morning for you. Tell us, how did you get here? What is Project Blueprint? Why? And Bryan, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you for the intro. Yeah, there's a little bit of a backstory to this. When I was 21 years old, I decided that I wanted to make a whole bunch of money. And it was a plan to try to do something meaningful in life. My education's primarily reading biographies. I enjoy reading about people in time and place throughout history who were able to identify impossibly hard things and then do them. Oftentimes things that couldn't be seen in that time period. And so after I built a company, Braintree Venmo, I sold it for $800 million in 2013. And then with some fresh capital, assessed what I could potentially do in the world. And I did a few things. One is I started a venture fund, OS fund, where we invested in genetics and synthetic biology, computational therapeutics, and nanotech. Some of the companies have gone on to do remarkable things in the world, including helping build the mRNA vaccine for COVID. Then also started a neurotech company, Kernel. We built the world's first brain interface that can image has the capacity to image every brain on the planet. The technology is now working. It took us 5 years to develop. And then with Project Blueprint, I met Dr. Zolman 2 years ago. And I was curious about aging and what really could be done if we could explore the frontiers of health and wellness and anti-aging, and we're able to go through a methodical protocol and implement with precision what would be possible. And so now we're 2 years into together, and the results are what they are. But it's been one of the most enjoyable and exhilarating adventures of my life. I enjoy every minute of it. So I'm excited that it's received the attention that it has. It's given life to a whole industry that's been going on for decades. I feel very fortunate to be the benefactor of work people have been doing for decades, and we can now implement these things. So excited to be part of the community.
Wonderful. We got a lot of questions that I'd maybe just like to ask you while we have you here. I mean, let's just start with, do you feel a difference?
Yeah, if I don't think somebody could have properly conveyed to me in words what it would feel like to be at this level of wellness. It's not conveyable.
And how would you describe the difference between, let's say an optimized state of health and someone who is just apparently healthy? Because I think sometimes the difficulty with explaining to people why people say, oh, well, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not sick. So how could there be anything better than this? So maybe can you explain a little bit about what do you mean by better?
There's a few reference points. One is we assess ourselves on a few different kind of ways. One is we could do so via measurement. The other is subjective assessment. And a lot of us do that on a daily basis of how do I feel mentally? What's my energy level? Do I feel fatigue? How long can I stay focused for? Am I irritable? And those assessments are good for a very small duration of time. And then we forget them. And then when we try to revisit them in the past, unless we've written them down and have some level of accuracy of recording, we forget what these subjective states are. And so when you compare yourself day to day to day, it's very hard to keep track of how you actually feel because it's a relative difference to your recent memory. And you don't get a comparison of a snapshot, for example, of me 2 years ago and me now, and get a really clean understanding of what is the clarity of mind, what is your mental stability, what is the emotional stability, how much difficulty can you encounter and still maintain your cool. And so these kinds of things that are very hard to assess with our minds. And even so, if you're keeping a rigorous diary. But then I'd also say fitness levels. I mean, I actually have never been this physically capable in my entire life. I can compete with my two boys, 17 and 19, on just about anything. I have no aches and pains. And throughout my entire life, I've always had this or that. It's kind of bugging me. So it really is. I don't think if I would have spoken to myself and attempted to persuade me of how I might feel, I don't think I could have conveyed it properly.
Wonderful. I think you've also been described as the world's most measured man. And one of the defining features of the protocol is measurement and taking the subjectivity out of the process and saying, I'm not going to rely on how I feel, but I'm going to look at the data, look at the numbers to tell me whether I'm really progressing. Has there ever been a point where you felt like you had a subjective interpretation that was completely at odds with the data?
I mean, I think on measurement, this is where Dr. Zolman and Ryan Smith and I get along so well, is we love data. And most of the time, people are hyper-focused on interventions, and they're eager to deploy interventions. Of equal, if not greater value, is the measurement protocol, understanding your baseline, having a clinical grade protocol, knowing where you're expecting to be, and then looking at the difference. And without that kind of rigor, it's very, very hard to make systematic progress. But I'd say, I don't know, Dr. Zolman, can we think of a time when expectations were mismatched? I'm trying to think of one.
Maybe the internal jugular vein stenosis.
Yeah, that's a great example. Going into this, I was an early investor in human longevity. I think a lot of companies know Venture's company. I was among first capital in that company. I was pretty excited about what they're doing. And I saw firsthand that when the people would go through their health nucleus, a significant percentage of them would find what we'd call these ticking time bombs. The story was typically they had just seen their physician. They got a clean bill of health and were on their way, and they go through and they did an MRI and they found a tumor or something like that. And so when we started, I figured that I was going to have a ticking time bomb somewhere along the path of some variety. And we found that in doing a routine MRI, it was just a full body MRI, as a secondary specialist we hired to look at it, he found some abnormal findings, and we ended up diagnosing bilateral jugular vein stenosis. So after a whole bunch of additional measurements, I have congenitally small jugular veins, which was restricting blood flow out of the brain. And so we went into red alert mode, and I just stopped everything we were doing trying to address this. But it made sense looking back. I had been waking up in the middle of the night with piercing headaches. I thought it might have been COVID, so I'd run downstairs and do a COVID test. I would be negative, and I couldn't quite piece it together. But yeah, it was our first encounter with a very large surprise. We looked at all the potential paths, including surgery, and tracked down some world experts on it. We ended up succeeding with a bunch of interventions we did. One is we did a lot of posture changes and a lot of posture PT. We found a world expert on that. Number two, we did really cool things like we have a medical grade ultrasound machine in the clinic here. And we designed these protocols where I would lay down on the bed, simulating me being on the pillow with my neck posture. And we'd look at my flow through my jugular veins and assess what is the flow like when I'm on my back, when I'm on my side, with a certain pillow height. And so we really went to extensive lengths to measure the exact flow rate and how we were doing with posture changes, and also nighttime posture. So it was a really wonderful experience in that we punched through a very large problem that we couldn't find a solution for anywhere in the world, that was systematically trying to deconstruct that.
Yeah, and also it wasn't just a routine MRI that helps diagnose it. It was also a special, a novel MRI that I've developed, which does more sequences than a typical whole body cancer screening MRI. And it was particularly on the magnetic resonance venogram time of flight 3D sequence that we saw the missing transverse process as well on the venogram, which helps confirm the diagnosis, because it's quite hard to diagnose just from the standard, neck imaging or that kind of stuff.
Seeing you guys interact now and in previous, one thing that's striking, Bryan, is that it feels as though this whole project is very selfless, in the sense that you've kind of given yourself up to science. At the same time, everyone who sees this says, I want to do it. I want part of this. So tell me, where do you draw the line between, am I enjoying this, and, am I doing this as if it's a full-time job? Or is it the fact that you're just addicted to health and that it's all kind of the same thing?
I've never had so much fun in my entire life. I love every second of this. I love the pain. I love the difficulty. I do. It is just play. I love it.
Okay. I'm going to ask one more question that actually a couple of people have asked before we move on to Oliver, and we'll come back. But, you've got some kids. Like, what do they think of all this? Are they adopting the protocol? Are they like, just tell us about that a bit.
I have 3 kids, 19, 17, and 13. The 19-year-old was doing this fully, and then he went to college, and he's found it to be much more challenging to do this with his resources there. My 17-year-old, who's with me right now, he's fully on the protocol. And he's also a really great sport in that every time we have something new to do, he's down. So if we say we're trying to achieve the skin health of a 20-year-old, and we want to look at multispectral imaging and autofluorescence and any other measurement we're doing, he's willing to raise his hand and be measured so we can have a comparison with what he is and what we're trying to become. And then my 13-year-old, she just is not that interested yet in what we're doing. I will say that we've won generally, though, on the culture. So, for example, sleep is, I think, my number one priority in life. The difference between despair and hope is a good night's sleep. And so we take sleep very seriously. So at nighttime, my son and I go to bed at the same time, 8:30 every night. And it doesn't matter what we're doing, what we're talking about. If we're watching a movie, we stop everything on the dot and we go to sleep. And so the family has adopted this culturally that we are around each other and we become like each other by virtue of our proximity. And it makes sense that we become our very best selves for each other.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think one of the opportunities with health becoming like a social phenomenon is that they become rituals that build family, build community, build friendships. And I don't think that's necessarily talked about as much, but we can all see it. So that's really lovely to see. Okay, so we'll come back because I've got some questions for you guys collectively. Next is Oliver. Oliver Zolman is the brainchild of the method. Alongside Bryan, he's overseen the development of the process. I think having the privilege of observing Oliver in action, and also working with scientists in general, I think one of the things that I've seen is that although you can think that science and medicine is very objective, there's one truth, there's one approach. When you scratch the surface, you begin to realize that actually there's a lot of subjectivity involved, and every doctor, every scientist has a different style, a different approach, a different way of addressing a topic. So I think, Oliver, first I want you to, tell us about how what went into your decision making, how you actually came to develop the protocol with Bryan. But what I'd also like to get a little bit about is like, what is Oliver Zolman's approach? I mean, how would you define your style as different to maybe some other scientists or clinicians out there, and how can we see that in the blueprint?
Yeah, so I mean, the first issue was always measuring aging, because you can do one marker right here and there, saliva epigenetic age, or PBMC telomere length, or grip strength, right? And that's kind of like the most, VO2 max maybe sometimes. It's kind of like the most people, ever did until, or still do pretty much kind of. So the issue there is like, if you're just measuring one thing, you're not really capturing aging at all. So the concept I came up with was my systematic organ framework. So there's the 81 organs now across both genders, and measuring if you can accurately measure biological age in all 81 organ types in individuals, n equals 1, then that's the best way of actually 1, measuring aging, and 2, proving age reversal as well. Oh, there's someone saying they can't hear anything. Is the microphone okay?
Oh, I could hear you, Oliver.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So measuring aging has never really been done properly before, and so to properly measure aging, you have to capture as much of all-cause mortality as possible, and as much of all individual clinical outcomes and pathological progression in all organs as possible. That's the theoretical gold standard. So just doing, one test like VO2 max or epigenetic age or whatever, it's proven already in the literature that doing that doesn't capture enough of all-cause mortality to definitively measure biological age or prove, rejuvenation at an organ level. So one thing that I worked on was, creating these multi-parametric models of measuring biological age in every organ. So for example, we're using imaging devices, biofluids, and other modalities all in a single organ to calculate that organ's age. Because this way you're capturing as much information about the organ as possible, and you're less likely to miss stuff. So for example, in the heart, rather than being like, what's my heart age? Don't know, do an ECG, you're fine, go home, you're okay. Waiting until you have atrial fibrillation, or waiting until you have, coronary calcium, or, some symptoms, right? It's pretty old school. Whereas measuring your actual heart age, you can use, quantitative research grade MRI and ultrasound, research grade ECG and artificial intelligence on ECG as well. And then some blood tests like, BNP and other things as well. And it's combining all these together, you get the best clinical outcomes prediction for that organ. You also do CT as well. Whereas if you do VO2 max, that's going to predict cardiac outcomes a little bit, but it's not really telling you about, what's your heart age, which part of your heart is oldest in the individual, and then what's the treatment plan, and how do we prove that we've reduced it, 5-10 years from what it was before. And then, there's all the biostatistics behind this, because there's a lot of people that claim they can measure their biological age accurately, or that they've reduced their age by a certain amount on some marker, but pretty much it's always biostatistically flawed. Pretty much everything I've seen, and there's some exceptions with epidemiologists where they can see through the mistakes, but really no one is measuring biological age accurately at n equals 1, because it's quite hard. There's a lot of biostatistical things that you have to meet, and that's why I've made the Zolman biological age biostatistical criteria, which are currently 21 biostatistical criteria that need to be met for a marker to be a good marker of biological aging, and to prove that you've actually reduced your biological age in a biostatistically rigorous way at n equals 1. It's easier at population level in large studies, to do some of these things, but n equals 1, the statistics are you need to be more rigorous than population studies. That's all the measurement. So there's two things in longevity, in rejuvenation longevity. There's the measurement. So 81 organ frameworks, gold standard research grade biostatistical stuff using multi-parametric methods, imaging devices, biofluids, very expensive and slow and complex to do, which is why it's taken 2 years. We haven't even completed everything in Bryan yet, with all the organs yet. And then second thing is the therapies. So with the therapies, me and my team over the past 5+ years, been systematically reviewing the entire literature, open and gray literature in the world, all medical databases, all existing clinics, every data source you can possibly have, unpublished stuff and so on. So systematically doing that for every single biomarker of aging across all 81 organ types and all modalities, and then writing gold standard peer-reviewed clinical practice guidelines for experimental rejuvenation protocols for each of those biomarkers and for each organ as well. And then that's called the level 1, 2, 3 protocol, which is on my website. And that level 1 is basically the lifestyle stuff that you need to have in place to have the fundamental super evidence-based World Health Organization stuff, which will get you, if you do it perfectly, you get average lifespan and health span of around 92 for both men and women. Level 2 stuff is non-age-related clinical outcome stuff. So it's mental health, sexual health, genetics, environmental exposures, all those kind of things, 12 different categories. And then level 3, this is where they're the clinical guidelines for each of the 81 organ types for experimental rejuvenation protocols. And that's where a lot of the experimental therapies that you'll be familiar with that come in as well. Quick summary.
Thank you. Got a whole bunch of questions, probably stemming from what you've described. Let's start with what organs or what aspects of Bryan's body did you find surprisingly simple to rejuvenate? And what organs or what aspects did you find surprisingly challenging?
Yeah, so I mean, the ease of an organ in an individual kind of depends on you know, the how good the existing literature base is for it, and also how easy it is to target, and how bad it is existing in the individual at n=1. So yeah, in Bryan, like he's had quite good skin already. Like his history, no major skin conditions like autoimmune stuff and so on, no massive sun exposure, and it's an easy organ to target. And it's also there's a massive industry around skin rejuvenation, loads of studies on it, lots of biomarkers on biopsy and non-biopsy based markers that you can use as well. So yeah, skin's been a night, probably for most people, skin is the easiest organ to rejuvenate. If because it's like easy to access these kind of therapies. There are established protocols. It's not too dangerous. You don't need complex, prescriptions to get access to these therapies. So skin is number one. Hair also easy to target because just sitting on your head there, rub stuff into it, not too tricky. But yeah, the harder stuff is it's it's the internal organs. And someone's saying lungs right now, and yeah, lungs are hard, especially with the COVID situation going on the past few years. So we actually saw Bryan's lung spirometry values change from age. We got like a 20-year age hit from post-COVID compared to before COVID. And that was unexpected because the symptoms weren't that bad. We were treating the symptoms as well with the COVID protocol, with all the recommended therapies for upper respiratory tract infections that are done. So all the randomized controlled trials implemented all those therapies for the COVID protocol. And we're still seeing this large reduction in spirometry values as well, and potentially some changes on lung ultrasonography also. So that's 2 examples or 3 examples: skin, hair, and lungs.
Great. I've got 2 more questions. So what are some of the most, everyone wants to know what's next, right? Everyone's like, okay, we've seen the blueprint, you've published it, you've been super transparent. What Oliver, what kind of therapies or interventions are you most excited about that's upcoming? Can you talk about them, just share a little bit about the future?
Yeah, so the way my protocol works is we start with the lowest risk stuff, basically the lowest risk, most evidence-based stuff at the beginning, and then you work your way up the tree. So level 1, level 2, we've kind of done all that now. Like the internal jugular vein stenosis was an example of a level 2 kind of genetic condition. So genetically small bilateral internal jugular veins. Level 3, there's tiers within that as well. So there's like, the early, there's level 3.1, the easy level 3 therapies that are low risk, easy to access, 3.2 and 3.3 kind of as well. So we're kind of at like level 3.2, maybe 3.3 for some things in the level 3 process. And so these things involve, more like cell therapies, stem cell therapies, gene therapies, whether that's DNA based or mRNA, siRNA, etc. And in the industry, those are called advanced ATMPs, advanced therapy medicinal products. But there's always, the thing is with the field, and the literature base is so big, there's always more therapies coming out in the literature. There's 50,000 randomized controlled trials a year, 1 million new papers per year, just in PubMed, never mind the Chinese databases and Google Scholar and unpublished data. And a lot of these trials and studies are relevant to aging and age-related diseases because that's the majority of healthcare, right? It's aging. So yeah, there's always new therapies coming out, whether that's level 1, 2, or 3, or like safer therapies or therapies that we're kind of like on the fence about, but then a new study comes out and we want to use it in a new way. So it's about keeping up with the extremely rapidly growing literature base, gold standard literature base, from randomized controlled trials to other studies as well, but also starting to implement these ATMP therapies as well.
All right, now this last question before we move to Ryan, probably for you and Bryan both. I mean, this whole this whole Project Blueprint has really struck a chord, and there's been a lot of response, lots of criticism, and which is great, because that means people are interested and it struck a chord. That's when you know you're onto something. My question to you is, what criticism did you find the most surprising? What criticism are you getting that you find most shocking or strange? And what would your response to it be?
Bryan?
Yeah, you want me to go on that? There's been a colossal amount of hate slung our way. I mean, I never would have guessed the outpouring of hate. And yeah, the lines of reasoning are interesting. Sometimes people are saying, okay, this is a rich guy going after the fountain of youth. That's threatening or bad, or an indication of society, inequalities. Some people just want to make the most harmful statement they can make. You can tell they think about this for a very long time and cook up their best zingers. And so we first of all, I love the hate, all of it. When it first started coming out, we put together the best hate of the internet, and we made a blueprint, a haters guide, a starter kit for Bryan Johnson hate. And we said, if you want to sling mud our way, like, here's your best ones. Now up your game. Don't do what others have said. Like, that's going to be silly. Do something really worth saying. And so it's really been, I think, it's been a form of group therapy. I mean, I think Blueprint is the expectation is not that everyone's going to implement Blueprint into their lives. They can do the basics. We freely share everything, the recipes and the supplement protocol, our own adventures with measurement, but it's clearly out of reach for a lot of people. And so it's not the expectation that everyone's going to do it. It really is also a commentary on society, where we have a society where people drive to work on a daily basis or go to work on a daily basis. And to get there, they need to pass by 20 fast food chains, 20 places selling sugar drinks. They need to navigate the addictiveness of algorithms. They need to not binge watch shows at night. They need to avoid having too much alcohol with friends and smoking. We've built a society around addiction, and all the powers of society are trying to get the individual addicted to their thing. And so I think a lot of people's commentary is maybe that it's just pointed our direction, but it's like these things are not great for the individual right now, because we're making it so hard on people. So I'd say it's really been useful to provoke a conversation about how best we build society, because right now what we're doing is clearly has some drawbacks.
Yeah, and also it's hard to take the hate seriously when people don't understand like biostatistics, like basic biostatistics, never mind like 7 years of medical school or whatever. So, and so we're publishing peer-reviewed publications of every rejuvenation marker with like 21 biostatistical criteria, and then N=1 consort spent checklist criteria in addition to that. So it's like open peer review, which anyone can peer review, and it's like it goes well beyond like any normal N=1 study ever done before for like biostatistical and conflict of interest rigor. So it's hard to take the hate seriously when they can't even comprehend that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's tough, because the idea of anti-aging, if I could use that word, it just naturally has a stigma. People don't like it. It feels unnatural, whether it's someone getting plastic surgery or someone, doing something else. For whatever reason, people have a mental barrier around it that needs to change. And, when you have, the way I see it, if you took all of this effort to target your diabetes, if you had it, or cancer, there would be no issue here, or there'd be very little issue. But there's something about the aging process that really gets under society's skin. And for doing something so publicly, you're bearing the brunt of whatever that thing is in people that they don't like it.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, I do really think that the commentary is not really about us. I think it really is about society. And I think people feel like the cards are unfairly stacked against them, and they don't readily have access to the things we're doing. And it's very difficult to navigate their way through. And so I think it's legitimate feedback for all of us of just how hard we make it to be healthy in life.
And I think you've sort of answered one of the questions here. What sort of criticism do you think is the most legitimate? This idea of inaccessibility. The cards are stacked against people in so many ways. Normal life, it's very hard to be optimally healthy in normal life, and I think people are trying to find ways to escape that, and it's tough. So I think this is probably. Oh, sorry.
One quick comment on this. Dr. Zolman and I, he spent his entire adult life building out his methodology on how to approach this. And I've built my entire adult life, the ability to do things like this. And we've spent, millions of dollars on this endeavor, and we share it for free with everyone. And so in the US, for example, somebody can do the basics of Blueprint for $1,500 a month, which includes groceries and supplements. That is still not accessible to everyone, but it's still pretty affordable. We've lowered the cost by at least 100x. And giving people a starting point of where to go. Most people I meet typically have a way of thinking where they'll say, first science says eggs are bad for you, then they say they're good for you. They never know. And then they just give up, and then they try to find their tribe in the world of what to do. And so I think as you bridge into Ryan here, what we've tried to say is we're going to publish all of our data. We're going to share everything we're doing. We're going to try to be the best health protocol in the world. Now, if somebody else can beat us, amazing, even better for them, because you're giving people guidance. We're not trying to be number one. We're trying to make it a standard that is comparable, to eliminate the confusion that individuals feel, or they feel like no one knows what's going on really. And we're trying to say there is a way to figure out what's going on, and let's actually have fun and compete with this, because then it helps everyone know that there are better ways to do things.
Biostatistical rigorousness.
Thank you, Bryan. That's the perfect segue to Rejuvenation Olympics and biological age testing and Ryan's segment. So I think there's, one of the titles, we put like 5 titles in one title for this talk, is this idea of a new social phenomenon of tracking and tracking your age reversal. We've had sleep trackers, we've had running trackers, people kind of showing off how well they're doing. And now what sort of is being introduced by longevity, this idea is, can we create a social conversation around and how much we can reverse our age and sort of take this step in, let's say, human progress, human evolution together in a positive way. So Ryan Smith is VP of Tru-Diagnostics. They are a epigenetic methylation company, and they provide bioage testing, and they've also launched with Bryan and Oliver the Rejuvenation Olympics, which are a public leaderboard, which, Bryan, you are at the top of, which is always a nice feeling. So Bryan, I'd love to pass it over to you. I'd love you to tell us a little bit about you, your work, Tru's work, and then a little bit about the significance of why testing and tracking is important in all of this.
Yeah, certainly. I think that to start with that last question first, I think that everyone knows the importance of aging. And I think that hopefully now people are starting to get an idea of the relative scale. I always like to mention things like the top 3 causes of death in 2020, aging accounts for 40% of the relative risk, while things like smoking and obesity are less than 5%. So we all know how bad smoking is for you. We know how bad obesity is for you, but we also sort of understate the importance of aging and longevity and how that could impact not just your quality of life, but also all those other disease risk factors. And so our company, Tru-Diagnostics, started in 2020, July of 2020, doing commercial tests, mainly to physicians in the space of preventative medicine, with that same premise that we wanted to track objectively aging as a risk factor and do it in ways that I think are generally better and more predictive than some of the things that Dr. Zolman mentioned, like, leukocyte telomere length or, even just grip strength. And at that time, these DNA methylation clocks were sort of leading the way as one single marker, which tended to be the most predictive. And so really since 2020, July of 2020, we have created probably the largest private epigenetic database in the world. We've tested now over 22,000 patients and have been able, through a lot of our physicians, been able to collect a lot of data on them. Nothing near the data that Dr. Zolman and Bryan have created. But what we've done is create, I would say, some really good ways to measure this process a little bit better. And I think that what we can do is now maybe counter a lot of those other critiques that have been leveled at the Blueprint or Bryan's platform, which is this testing is one single measure. It might not be as comprehensive as the aging process is and how as complicated as that aging process is. But with one single measure, we can more effectively give feedback on someone's biological aging process than ever before. And so our testing has been going very well and expanding and finding many more insights for it. But I'll have to give credit to both Bryan and Dr. Zolman, because we didn't imagine that, I should say, it was not our idea to create this Rejuvenation Olympics. It really was Bryan and Dr. Zolman's. And I think the response we've had has been pretty impressive. We've had a lot of people interested in joining the Olympics and really trying to compete, but also to find the insights on what's driving this aging reversal the most. And so we partner with them to do one of our aging algorithms. The Dunedin pace is that standard because it really outperforms most of the other ways to measure that aging process from DNA methylation alone.
And since you've launched the Rejuvenation Olympics, I'd love to hear a little bit about the feedback from the community and people participating.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that we've had just a tremendous response. I think way more than we would have anticipated. We're sort of kicking ourselves for not doing it earlier, just as Tru-Diagnostic. But I think that some of the biggest critiques that we have are about the measurements themselves and sort of the criteria that we have. So when we first launched, we didn't have, I would say, the same criteria that we're rolling out now, which are things like a minimum of at least 3 tests, a minimum of over 6 months of time, and some controls to make sure that this is much more accurate and really giving us the insight that we need into what's changing these different types of measurements. And so we've sort of changed a lot of the rules. And I think at first, things like the amount of relative change, could someone, for instance, have really bad health purposefully so that they could have a bigger age rejuvenation when they stop some of those bad behaviors. And so we've tried to take those into account to really make this as objective as possible, but also as informative as possible to true biological aging. And I think that that's the other big thing that I would mention is that these epigenetic clocks up until this point have been relatively poor. We've had things like really big problems with precision, where the mean absolute error could be up to 4.9 years with some of those earlier clocks. And not to mention that some of them don't reverse with changes like caloric restriction, which we know are definitive ways to improve health span and lifespan. And so these clocks have had, I would say they've always been hopeful, but as Dr. Zolman mentioned, they've really been population level analysis tools and not N of 1 tools. And we're proceeding that direction now, where this can be used on an individual basis. And I think that Dunedin pace really satisfies those criteria in a way that the other clocks have not. So that's why we really chose it to be our one metric, to hopefully be one single measurement that many people can afford, to make it a little bit more cost effective and to sort of track that progress in a community type fashion.
Bryan, can you just describe what Dunedin pace means?
Yeah, certainly. So the way that I always like to preamble here is to talk about some of the generations of these clocks. The first generation clocks are what came out in 2013 and really popularized by Steve Horvath and UCLA. These clocks were trained to predict the chronological age of a participant or a patient. So they were used for things like dating refugees to see if they were adults or minors and therefore eligible for asylum, or for crime scene investigations. But the problem with those clocks is that we know that the better that they get, the closer we get to predicting your birthday. birthday, which is not what we want to know. If we wanted to know that, you wouldn't have to take an expensive test. We could generally just ask you. And so these second generation clocks really started in 2018. And they started with Morgan Levine's PhenoAge and secondarily to that, Dr. Horvath's GrimAge. And those were trained to predict biological phenotypes. So these are, again, getting closer to the global picture of aging. What Dr. Zolman and Bryan are measuring at an organ-specific scale, these we're getting a little bit close to with overall phenotype. So training to things like time until death or 9 blood-based biomarkers. I think Dr. Zolman even has that PhenoAge calculator just from the blood markers on his website. And then the Dunedin Pace is the first of the third generation clocks. And the important thing about that clock is that it is done off longitudinal biomarkers. So instead of looking at the same patient or different patients across different points in their life, we've actually been able to follow the exact same patients over the course of their life, really starting in 1972 when this cohort of children were born. And we just finished our 51-year age follow-up in January. So this algorithm will continue to improve. And when compared to the other algorithms, it's generally more predictive of almost every single outcome, with one exception, which is the GrimAge tends to be more predictive of death. But it's very, very close even there anyway. So things like facial aging, grip strength, balance, the Dunedin Pace is the most significantly associated with.
All right, one last question to all of you, and then I'm going to open it up to some questions directly from the audience. Okay, Rejuvenation Olympics. If this was the real Olympics, you have the issue of doping, right? So you've got a control for people cheating. I mean, and you touched on this, Ryan, but if we were to take the Rejuvenation Olympics seriously and we wanted to create an equal playing ground for everyone, what would that look like? Could it be something like applying a budget of spend per year on thing, or is it about you can't take certain medications effects? So tell me, like, how would we make it as fair as possible for all of you guys?
Yeah, I'll jump in first with maybe some of the things that we've done, if that's okay, and then I think give it over to Dr. Zolman and Bryan. But one of the things that we wanted to counter first is blood substituting, right? And the equivalent of maybe blood doping, where someone might take their sample and then take their child's sample, for instance, and show massive age reduction. So we do take SNP data, sort of these 17 genetically identifiable markers, and match them up for individual samples. So someone can't submit someone else's sample, and that will hopefully level the playing field from an individual basis to make sure that we're testing the exact same person's sample. In addition to that, we've included things that might cause some skepticism as well, particularly things like more than a 20% variance from one test to the other. We haven't seen, I would say that more of that variance in any clinical trial that we've done yet. And thought that it was definitely a good factor to include as well. So I think that those types of things will get people away from trying to game the system. But I think in terms of how we might want to structure the system, I think that there's probably a lot of ways to go on that. I think that we could have, segments where it's just lifestyle or diet and nutrition. We could have segments that include everything. But I think honestly, for me, I'm excited to see give everyone as much opportunity to do anything that they want, so we can really pick out what's working.
Awesome. I'd love to start jumping into the comments, but before I do, I just want to make sure you guys all saw that Kate, that works with Bryan, posted in the chat a whole bunch of resources that you guys can check out to learn more about the blueprint, join the newsletter, watch the YouTube channel. I know lots of you have lots of questions. We're not going to be able to answer them all, but you could probably find a lot of resources there. So just looking through the chat, I'd love to invite Dan to ask his question. Dan Howe.
Hey, thanks so much for taking the time. Really insightful and super agree with everything you guys are trying to do. So yeah, I just wanted to ask about your thoughts on other kind of big names in the space right now, such as David Sinclair and Andrew Huberman. What your thoughts are on their approach, and then also if there's any other names that you suggest that you think are interesting. Thank you.
So approach doesn't matter, results matter. So I follow hundreds, literally thousands of scientists across PubMed, etc. So yeah, whoever has the best results wins. But those results have to be biostatistically valid.
Anyone else have any tips or resources or places, anyone who's interested in the space that you might recommend some of our listeners to follow or listen to? And if not, that's totally cool.
I might jump in there at least. I think that one of the problems with aging as a field is a lot of times it becomes sensationalized and pulled out of science. And so I think that there are a couple individuals that I always recommend following who have a really reasonable approach. I think they're generally grounded in science. And so I definitely always recommend Matt Kaeperlein as a good key opinion leader and Morgan Levine. I think that they both are excellent and would highly recommend that. I think that David Sinclair's popularized some epigenetic testing with his new Tally company. If you'd ever like a comparison there, I'm always happy to provide that, and I think some of the facts and evidence behind that as well.
I mean, and this comes back to that really fascinating idea of how much of science is objective when you have a subjective interpretation by the public, by different figures. Sometimes it is hard to get to, what's accurate. And I like what Oliver said. It's about results. If you could show me the results, then I'm happy to follow your lead. So
yeah, that's results at N=1 as well, because there's results obviously in trials, but if you're trying to improve rejuvenation in individuals, you have to follow extremely strict biostatistical criteria to prove that at N=1, like I was saying earlier. So I published my biological ages in a biostatistically valid way, and likewise in Bryan, but many of the doctors or scientists don't do that.
Thanks, guys. Next up, Richard Kasaki. I see your question here with some likes on it. Would you like to ask our speakers?
Sure, yeah, I'll go ahead. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure how serious this question can be, but I was wondering if anyone can comment on like non-biological longevity ideas / future directions. And this might go more into sci-fi, but things like artificial organs, limbs, and even some sort of limited mind uploading, because all of you've been talking about is very, very biological. So yeah, just wondering.
So there's actually a longevity level 4, which is prosthetics. And yeah, so I've got there's a whole dissertation on that, prostheticizing all 81 organ types, kind of like Ray Kurzweil. He had some great pioneering ideas about that in his book 10 years ago with Terry. But yeah, it's coming, but it's kind of like, that's why it's level 4, because it's after level 3. Like a lot of the biological replacement organs that are doing like 3D bioprinting, etc., or in vivo bioprinting or ECM scaffolds and so on, they're coming out first, this decade, next decade, except for like simple things, like multifocal lenses, maybe retinas as well with higher megapixel counts. They're coming through. But yeah, generally level 4 stuff comes after level 3. So the prosthetization of the human body is predicted more from 2040 to 2100. And by around, I think the brain is going to be the last organ to be fully prostheticized. And you can do some Kurzweilian extrapolations, right? But it's predicted around, I think, 2100, 2120 for the brain to be successfully prosthetized for the first time completely. So it's not too far away.
And I'm just gonna plug in a question to add to that question, Bryan. Thinking of, let's say, non-biological, strictly biological visions for longevity in the future, seeing as your work with kernel and sort of the interface between the brain and machines. I mean, do you see any other interesting developments in sort of where technology is taking, or how longevity could be translated through technology in the future?
When I think about this problem, I try to imagine a thought experiment where I zoom out on planet Earth and I'm looking at it from space, and I try to quiet all the noise, everything that doesn't matter, and just try to assess what is really going on. And I observe 3 things. One, is that artificial intelligence is improving incredibly fast in ways that we won't be able to predict entirely. Number two is the sustainability of planet Earth is in question. And three is we engage in an enormous amount of self-destructive behavior as a species that we are normalized to. And when I think about the consequential moment, and again, being within the framework of reading these biographies my whole life, I wonder what people in the 23rd and 24th century would say about the early 21st century. Your talent can hit the target that no one else can. Genius hits the target no one else can see. In the early 21st century, what is the genius move for us as a generation? And changing our relationship with time through aging may be one of the more consequential things we could do. It may make us more compassionate and loving, more peaceful. It may make us less reluctant to go to war. It may change how we understand ourselves and be more open to this coevolution with artificial intelligence and how we think about ourselves. But to me, we are in a species defining moment. And I don't know, to me, it feels urgent that we sober ourselves up and think this thing through thoroughly and prepare ourselves. But I don't think a lackadaisical attitude or that somehow in a future point in time we'll reconcile this. To me, this is the heart. And so Blueprint really is about a philosophy of trying to ready oneself for the future of being human.
Wow. Thank you for that, Bryan. What a really inspiring and beautiful vision. And right on, some people are saying, and I totally agree. I'm conscious that we're reaching the end of our time, and you guys have been very, very generous with us. I want to sneak in one more question, just because we got so many requests for people saying, how can we get involved? Do you guys need help? Can we join your team? And I love seeing that, because it means that people just want to help out in whatever way they can. So to all three of you, is there a way for people to get involved? Is there a way for people to sort of contribute to the movement?
Yeah, on my side, just go on oliverzolman.com and then text me on WhatsApp.
Great. All right, guys.
I'll say for me, I hang out on Instagram and Twitter. Same thing, hit me up. We're evaluating a lot of things. So this has just opened up a lot of possibilities. So I think what Dr. Zolman said is right. It's a fresh new day for us.
Awesome. Ryan?
Yeah, so I can always be reached at Ryan at Tru-Diagnostic.com if someone would like to reach out to us. We're doing a lot of interventional things, more, I would say, specific investigations to find out what's working and what's not. But I think that if I could ask anyone to get involved, it's just sharing, scientifically accurate information and theories on aging don't get sensationalized, and let's try and make it a good science.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to give one last plug for the Oxford Society of Aging and Longevity. If you guys like what you just saw and want to see more, please sign up to our mailing list if you're not on it already. If you have any questions or want to get involved, just add me on LinkedIn. I'm Simon Sakhai. You'll find me. We've got a lot of stuff going on in the future, and we love bringing more people on board. So Oliver, Bryan, Ryan, thank you so much. What a privilege to have you guys, and looking forward to seeing what's next.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks so much.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.